welcome to episode 319 of Late Night Linux, recorded on the 31st of January 2025. I'm Joe, and with me are Phelim.
Egg chasing again.
Graham.
From the far left wing.
And Will.
Hello.
I'd just like to point out, I'm not talking about politics, I'm talking about rugby.
Yeah. Anyway, Graham, welcome back.
Thanks, guys. Sorry for missing the last one.
Yeah, I just said you were otherwise engaged. I didn't think you'd want the audience to know the truth.
I had the shits. Thanks, Joe.
Not just the shits, though.
No, I actually lifted several inches off the seat.
Oh dear, I might have to cut this. Anyway, there's a political podcast I listen to, and over Christmas...
Was that Late Night Linux?
It was, yeah. Anyway, over Christmas, they put out a load of episodes that they'd recorded in advance with what-if questions, counterfactuals. Like, I think one of them was, what if Boris Johnson had backed Remain instead of Leave, and stuff like that. So I thought, right, I'm having that. That is a great idea. So I'm going to put some what-if questions to you lot. What if Qt had been under a friendlier license?
This is a really good one. And do you think we should provide a little bit of context?
I think so for the younger listeners.
That's right, the younger listeners.
The ones that don't care about licenses, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, from a quarter of a century ago.
Oh, shut up, Graham.
Or more, actually. Maybe it's 30 years. Anyway, very early on, I don't know, 96, 97, when Matthias Ettrick created the KDE desktop based on Qt. Qt, made by Trolltech, which is a cross-platform API, really, so that you could build something on Linux and you could build it on Windows, wasn't an open source license. Early pressure from those early development phases led to the QPL, the Qt public license, but that still wasn't an OSI compatible open source license. And really, this dissatisfaction with the licensing of Qt led to the creation of GTK and ultimately the GNOME desktop, which created a fork early on. I think that's about right, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
That's my understanding. And my understanding is that the reason that GNOME became the kind of standard in the big distros is because of doubts and anxiety, let's say, about the Qt license and the fact that they could do rug pulls that we ultimately saw with them kind of only making certain releases open source and some proprietary. And so that put people off and made them embrace GTK, and why GNOME is now basically the standard desktop.
Inferior desktop, I think, is the word you're looking for, but yeah.
Yeah.
But also, I think the community was right to do that. I think they were right to hedge against Trolltech and Qt and what they may do with the licensing, because it was very unclear. And for many years, they experimented with proprietary optimizers. And even now, it's only a couple of years ago we were talking about their latest releases only being available to paying customers, and it's still unclear. And I feel that's always been a mistake. And in fact, the existence of GTK and GNOME, I think, has always been a really good hedging pressure on Qt.
So what would have happened if it had been, say, GPL or even a permissive license?
I think KDE would have existed as KDE does. I think the people who like the way GNOME is run or has that sort of methodology of being very opinionated, I don't think they would have been happy in KDE land. I think it would have led to less people designing their own toolkits, which, to be quite honest, I think is a bit of a waste, because GTK and Qt, although I completely agree with Graham, yeah, it was definitely a good thing that it was there to keep Trolltech sound, but I don't think that's where the greatest developments in technology are. And it's a shame that that's duplicated, so to speak, but I think GNOME would have existed in some form as the way LXQT and XFCE both exist for the Qt side of things and the GTK side of things. Some people want a simple desktop, some people want, a very opinionated way of doing things, and I don't think any one desktop can be that for anybody.
I think we'd have had GDE. I think KDE would have been the default desktop, the only desktop that counted back then, and then there would have been a fork. And the people that are so heavily invested in GNOME at the time would have created their own fork of KDE at the time and made it their own, and that would probably be the dominant desktop now.
So instead of cool desktop, it would have been good desktop.
Yeah.
Goodest, maybe, yeah.
Or goofy, or I don't know, some GIMP desktop environment.
GIMP desktop.
And so do you think that Ubuntu would be KDE based now?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what if I bet on it, yeah, I would.
Yeah, I think the only reason that Canonical, from the very much outside opinion here, the only reason that they did a GTK-based Unity was the fact that they had the developers already up to speed on that. Now, if everybody was Qt up to speed, I think that takes away a lot of those barriers of, oh, well, we're GNOME, we have to stick with it sort of thing. I think the funny thing is that I think KDE is actually so flexible that you could pretty much replicate most of the desktop environments in it with much less work than having to redo the whole thing yourself.
Well, yeah, you could create an XFCE looking desktop. You could create a GNOME shell. You could make a Mate looking. You could do whatever you wanted with KDE because it is so flexible. As far as the end user is concerned, until they got into the settings and just became overwhelmed and gave up.
You don't need to go into the settings. Why does everybody have this? I don't know when I was last in the bloody settings, for Christ's sake.
I think it's a very interesting thought experiment. I mean, it's making me think back to KDE's history and things like the transition to KDE3 and KDE4. What would have happened if that had been the default desktop at the time? I can't imagine it would have been. I just can't see it not forking at those places or something changing in the way that KDE was run and the people that kind of dictated what KDE was. I don't think it would be the KDE we'd recognise now if it had been the only desktop from that time.
Well, there would have been a hell of a lot more money going into it, I would imagine. Whereas now, it's not like there's no money in KDE, but it certainly hasn't had the money that GNOME has had spent on it. And so things like accessibility would be much better.
In a certain sense, though, I actually, well, not that I have to take a paycheck from the money that I work on KDE, but it is nice that it's more user-owned, I find. There's a lot of corporate sort of meddling, maybe would be the word, for the likes of big distros like Red Hat, Fedora, Canonical and stuff like that, where they have an idea what they want to do and they kind of have this chance to redirect developer effort and change the sort of way that things, there's a lot of water cooler talk goes on probably, whereas KDE doesn't really have that because it is more a community distro. And I, to be quite honest, like that more about it. That is, I think, one of its greatest strengths is the fact that the people who use it are the biggest contributor of funding for it.
Is the word scrappy?
Scrappy, yeah. I do prefer the underdog status, in fairness.
All right. What if IBM hadn't bought Red Hat?
This one, I really don't know.
I don't think things would have been that different, to be honest.
I don't think there's been enough time.
I think they still would have done the CentOS rug pull, if you want to call it that. Let's just say it's source code change.
Diplomatic.
I agree with you, Joe. I think so. It seemed to be that was the way that Red Hat was going, the way it was positioning itself. And there are quite a few huge companies like IBM, maybe not even deeply into technology like IBM. I'm thinking of someone like GE or some huge megacorp like that would have picked up Red Hat.
Another question I would have thought of on this same sort of line, what if Red Hat had not gone public? Because what we see as IBM buying Red Hat, is that just a continuation of Red Hat becoming public, or is that the point where they changed? Because now you have the whole investors have to be kept happy sort of thing. Stock price must increase, grow month on month nonsense.
Line must go up, yeah.
Like, is IBM just a sort of marginal extension of that, is what I was thinking.
I think given enough time, maybe 5 years or more, the tables would be turned and Red Hat would be continuing in their expansion. They would have been looking at making acquisitions, and the business computing market would have been very tempting for them. And I wouldn't be surprised if things would be the other way around, that they would have been interested in buying IBM.
I don't know. I don't think that's realistic, the size of IBM, but I think you're right that they would have been looking to make more acquisitions.
They would have bought Lenovo.
Can you imagine if they had, though, how well Linux would work on ThinkPads? You'd have fingerprint readers and everything. Well, do let us know if you like this format of the what-if questions and send in your own. show@latenightlinux.com. Okay, this episode is sponsored by Tailscale. Go to tailscale.com/LNL. Tailscale is the easiest way to connect devices and services to each other, wherever they are. Everyone these days has a VPN as a sponsor, but Tailscale isn't like those. This isn't about hiding your browsing habits from coffee shop owners, and it's not about watching Netflix in another country. Tailscale is a proper VPN for connecting your devices securely. It's great for companies, and it's great for self-hosters. Tailscale makes creating software-defined networks easy, securely connecting users, services, and devices. You can get set up in just a few minutes and then see everything in the web interface. I love how easy and clear it is to see all my devices and everything I need to know about their status. Tailscale's personal plan will always be free, so support the show and try Tailscale out for free today. You'll get up to 100 devices and 3 users for free at tailscale.com/LNL with no credit card required. That's tailscale.com/LNL. Let's do some discoveries then. Will, N8N, or is it Nation?
I don't know how it's pronounced. I haven't looked it up, but it's short for Nodemation, which is a pretty horrible contraction, in my opinion.
It's like K8s and all that, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, quite. The deal with this is that it's like Node-RED, but for business people. And what it does is hook lots of business things together. So, for example, it will hook a webhook to Google Sheets, to Slack, to MongoDB, to Outlook, to YouTube, to Dropbox, for whatever weird business case you have.
Party like it's 2010.
I swear we've had people trying to sponsor us with shit like this in commercial products before, but this is open source then.
Yeah. And actually, I can see quite a lot of use for it. If you want to create a workflow in, for example, Slack, because that's what your business uses, you can use the whatever it's called, extension builder or whatever in Slack that will let you create a webhook, and then you can call that webhook from your business logic elsewhere, and you can have it send a Slack message to a certain channel at a certain time and all that kind of thing. Well, this will let you build all of that, but also build in pretty much any system which has an API. There are 400 extensions, and it's pretty straightforward to create a new one. If it's got an API, a public API, then there's probably an add-on for it already. And if there isn't, you could create one of your own in JavaScript, so pretty easy to talk to web services. And you can draw out, by dragging boxes and connecting things with arrows on the screen, your workflow. So when this happens, then do this and connect that to that and the output of this to the input of that. A bit like Node-RED, except for that all of the systems that it's interacting with are typically web services. So I think this is going to be quite a powerful tool for a lot of people. I haven't spent enough time with it yet to really get a huge amount of value from it. And I don't know where it would be a good place to host it. Like, should you run it on your local machine and just leave it ticking away in the background? Or should you deploy it to some Kubernetes cluster somewhere and just leave it running and talk to it over the web? I suspect the latter. But it looks like a really promising, interesting thing. It's been going for a couple of years, but it really seems to have picked up recently. I've seen YouTube videos about it. I've seen more and more developers on GitHub that I follow contributing to it. So it feels like it's really sort of picking up in velocity now. I think it will be quite a useful tool, but I haven't spent enough time with it. But it looks fun.
Dare I say it, is this some sort of middleware? Is that what you'd call it?
Yes, I think you're right. And I think IBM will be buying it any second now.
Yeah, I'm slightly worried for them about this because this is right in their territory.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read enough about it, but maybe that's where it came from. I think that's where Node-RED came from, right?
Ooh, God, yeah, you might be right there. I tell you though, the amount of things that it integrates with is disturbing.
I am pretty sure that this is not open source, by the way, technically speaking. I think the source is there to be read, but there are a lot of restrictions on what you can do with it. It's a fair code license. This seems like one of those dodgy ones to me, but I might be wrong.
It says full source code available and self-hostable. Well, I guess it doesn't necessarily say it's not.
Yeah, source available. There's your red flag.
Boo.
I very much doubt this is OSI approved.
I take back my thinking it was good. Boo!
Yeah, I haven't read the license in any depth, but the source is there and you are allowed to use it for your own personal business purposes or non-commercial or personal use. So it's okay in my book for now.
I guess it'd be good for internal tools, maybe.
Yeah. I don't think you'd want to build a product off it, though.
And I personally am fine with that. I think that's, if you want to build a product off of it, and then you should contribute to the development of it.
Yeah, I suppose.
You heard it here first. Will #hates freedom.
Apparently so. Phelim, ISD.
Yeah, in a long-running segment of things Phelan wish he had years ago and are now not as much use to him, but could be of use to someone else, ISD. It's a way to explore System D using a nice TUI, and it is actually really nice the way it does. When you start it up, you get a list of all your processes there. It's actually mouse, sensitive, active. You can click on stuff, essentially. So if you click on a service, you've then got the ability to see the status of the service. You can click the journal entries for that. You can cat the actual service file for it. There's even things like the help documentation for the particular service, say if it's SSH or whatever, it brings that all up. And I think it's a really cool way for people who may not be as into Linux distro but want to get in on the sort of admin side of things to understand how services tie together, because it has things like dependencies, so you can see the crazy amount of dependencies that whatever has. It's just really well done. It's really nice and simple to use. And it comes as an app image if you don't install it via, say, I think it's a Python application. So it comes in via UV, which I haven't actually got anything installed with that. So I just used the app image. I thought it was a bit easier to install. And it's really nice. Just be careful, though, if you do use the arrow keys to scroll through the services and then you click on something else, you will split your view, which is a bit of a sly one. I was very confused why the status of my dbus service had SSH information down the bottom of it, and it seems to do this like dual display. So just watch that one.
I have discovered an amazing new concept, right? You're going to really have to bear with me here. So, at night, if you're looking at your screen and it's a bit blue, it's a bit like not very nice. Well, you don't have to put up with that. You can make it almost redshifted.
No way.
To make it a little bit warmer. This is going to catch on, I'm telling you. Okay, so I finally decided, right, I've had enough of my blue screen. Can XFCE do this? And yeah, Redshift. I just had assumed that this would only work with modern desktop environments. But no, you just install Redshift, which is in the Ubuntu repos. And it's got all fancy shit for like scheduling this and what's your coordinates and everything. And it'll time it with the sun and everything. Fuck all that. Redshift -O and then the number that you want. I went with 4500 in the end. Nice and red. And then if you want rid of it, Redshift -X lowercase.
And has it made any difference?
Well, I'm not convinced about all this circadian rhythms shit. I mean, I just have mad hours anyway. But it looks more pleasant, yeah.
I actually used to use the feature in the inverse. When I had to work through the night sometimes for a project, I'd actually make sure it wasn't working, and it did actually make a difference. I'm almost entirely convinced that I kept more awake when it wasn't on.
Right. Maybe. But the other night I was just reading stuff and I was just like, this screen is too blue. I want it to be redshifted. I had to look up what it was called. Oh yeah, Redshift. I remember that. I thought, surely this is not going to work on XFCE. And then it just did. I mean, when you close the lid and have to log back on, it's forgotten it again and it's all blue. And I have to go back to the terminal and run it. But it does work. And I like I said, I didn't investigate the scheduling and all that stuff. I'm sure that works if you can be asked to get into it. But I suppose it must work with anything that's X11. I wouldn't like to try it with Wayland. I doubt it would work, but you never know.
It's working for me on Plasma with Wayland.
Right. Interesting.
Do you not just use the built-in one, though?
Yeah. I don't know whether it's the Redshift or not.
Right.
I've used it for years. And I don't know whether it helps circadian rhythms, but as you know, when you've all seen me on my webcam, my room is red anyway. I like the kind of red light.
Yeah.
In your boudoir.
All right, Roxanne, calm down.
Well, I thought you were developing photos the first time I saw you.
I just find it a lot easier on my eyes. I don't like the bright glare of white. What I really like is you can't tell when it starts to happen. And then when you accidentally, break it and go back to white, you think, shit, that really has made a difference.
Yeah, I should look into automating it, and you can have it gradually kind of go in and out. Whereas when I remember, Like now I've just realized this screen is really blue and I'd like to do it, but I haven't got it installed and I'm not going to mess around while we're recording. But I just like to have complete manual control over it, I think. I like to just be able to go to the terminal, type what I need, and then boom, it's just done. But I should probably automate it to make my life nicer. But then with my phone, I just have it on constantly. I don't want it to change. I never want it to be blue. I just always want it to have that kind of orangey glow to it. So maybe I just need to have a startup script or something.
You need to have an amber monitor like an Alien.
But there is, if you run Redshift-GTK, you can get a notification icon and you can have that run on startup, I think. So I'm sure that I'm doing it wrong by just manually running these commands, but it's Linux, so I can do that. Okay, this episode is sponsored by 1Password. Do your end users always, and I mean always without exception, work on company-owned devices and IT-approved apps? I didn't think so. So how do you keep your company's data safe when it's sitting on all those unmanaged apps and devices? 1Password has an answer to this: Extended Access Management. 1Password Extended Access Management helps you secure every sign-in for every app on every device, because it solves the problems traditional IAM and MDM can't touch. 1Password Extended Access Management is the first security solution that brings all these unmanaged devices, apps, and identities under your control. It ensures that every user credential is strong and protected, every device is known and healthy, and every app is visible. 1Password Extended Access Management is security for the way we work today, and it's now generally available to companies with Okta and Microsoft Entra, and in beta for Google Workspace customers. 1Password's award-winning password manager is trusted by millions of users and over 150,000 businesses, from IBM to Slack. And now they're securing more than just passwords with 1Password Extended Access Management. Secure every app, device, and identity, even the unmanaged ones, at onepassword.com/late-night-linux, all lowercase. That's onepassword.com/late-night-linux. While we were together to record last time, but before we recorded, Will raised an interesting question. Why is there so little interesting Linux news these days? And I said, we should ask that question on air. Now, I have a positive answer to this, but the truth is that there is less and less news for us to cover on this show.
As to why it's happening, I don't know. I got a couple of theories here. I think one of them is that we're quite picky about the things that we talk about. And it feels like all of the innovation in software is all going into AI, which we tend not to talk about very much. And it feels like all the coverage in all the press is going into AI because that's where all the money is.
Well, how big of a mistake have they made when it could have been done for much cheaper in China?
I've got a theory as well, in that I think there's probably more news, but just spread over a much wider area. Whereas before, when we talked about these things, we had a much smaller impact and influence, and we understood all of the parties involved in these discussions. But now, basically, every software company is involved in open source. Every software company is involved in Linux. So in that way, it's established, and the news isn't the same as how we used to report it, but it's also become so much broader.
No, I think it's because Linux and open source is mature now. And I think it's somewhat what you said, Graham. Open source is just the standard now. It's not an interesting thing for something to be open source necessarily. Whereas once upon a time it was. If Microsoft put Linux in Windows, that was this huge deal, for example, with WSL, whereas now we just take that for granted.
I don't know whether that's just our bubble though, but I mean, I do see an awful lot of stuff happening that's not FOSS still. Quite a lot of it, and quite a lot of money getting spent on stuff that isn't FOSS. So I don't know if that's us just being in our bubble again, like usual, but I think a lot of external factors like non-tech news is also kind of affecting all of the news right now.
What, you mean politics?
Yes. And war in Europe. And I think there's quite a lot going on that people are kind of missing or forgetting about this type of stuff.
Yeah. And also, we're not allowed to talk about politics because some of our listeners have told us to. So that's why we can't.
Yeah.
And they polled everybody.
Yeah, the 10 people who wrote to us and said, it's far too political, just stick to Linux.
It wasn't even fucking 10. That's
Let's just keep in our lanes, guys. Come on.
Sorry.
Yeah, let's not talk about politics on a show about a part of tech that is inherently political.
Okay.
I do think part of it is that the desktop distros and just distros generally are very mature at this point. And you could say that they're lacking innovation, maybe, because there was a time when there was new stuff happening all the time on the desktop, on the server, whereas now it's sort of just reached an equilibrium where shit just works.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I assumed that once I kind of left that ecosystem and moved on, then I just stopped giving a shit. And so it was all still happening, but I wasn't paying attention. But it sounds like it's not happening as much as it once was.
I've just had a thought. Do you think this could be related to the reason why we don't have younger people getting involved with open source projects as well? The same kind of, it's become established, and for a certain generation of users, it's always been there. It's not that people take it for granted, but it's just that you assume that it's just will always be there. Whereas it used to feel much more like a battlefield than it is now. And now it's just stable, as you say. Nobody cares really about GNOME and KDE as much as Phelim likes to talk about it.
I think that there is actually innovation. Now I think about it, you think about the immutable stuff or composable, whatever you want to call it, that we don't cover because Phelim just fucking moans about it.
Oh, yeah. Make me the problem.
Yeah. There's also relatively interesting things happening with new desktops and whatnot, but again, politics is part of that. Like, there's one that I'm not going to mention that's run by fucking arseholes that is just blocklisted as far as I'm concerned. We're not going to talk about it.
Also, I think I was joking about KDE and Phelim. Sorry, Phelim. But I do think that most people, I don't want to say younger people, but people who've come to Linux in the last 10 years, they don't care, nor do they care, and nor would we want them to care, in the same way that we used to argue about such things, or different, things that happened in those worlds were important to us. Maybe we are the problem. Are we the baddies?
I think, though, once there is a need for access to something, or somebody takes something away, then those people will kind of get what we're all about, I think. Like, we were unlucky in the fact that we had to grow up with Firefox is not supported to use Internet Explorer 6, and, I'm sorry, that software doesn't run on Linux, you'll have to use Windows. Probably not even the Mac had the software, but we've got to the point where it's a website, it's a pretty standards-based one. It doesn't really matter what you run. You can run it on your phone, you can run it on your tablet, you can run it on your Linux, Windows, Mac, whatever. And I think we're lucky that way, but there is always that danger of companies who want to hoard more than they actually deserve to take. And then that's when people realize standards matter.
Well, yeah, once websites only work in Chrome, maybe people will sit up and think about it again.
We need an enemy.
Sadly, I don't think people will do anything if websites only work in Chrome. They'll only do something when Chrome only works on Android, and then the Apple people will be up in arms. But by then it'll be too late. And to ask perhaps the most boomerish question ever, and you guys are not qualified to answer, is there much of an open source scene on TikTok, for example? Is it a topic that people who use more modern social media platforms give a shit about? I have no idea.
I have no idea either. I only watch re-uploaded TikToks to YouTube Shorts.
Same.
So I wouldn't know, but I've not seen anything there about open source at all, really.
Mine's all about plumbing for some reason.
For some reason. Plumbing and electrics, that's what you have.
I hadn't really thought of that. Phelim mentioned it first, that everything's in the web, in the web browser. So also, it used to be important that we had applications that competed with proprietary applications, and the desktop was important. But yeah, all we do basically is in a web browser.
On the desktop, yeah, but on mobile, it's all about apps, isn't it? And it's generally all about mobile these days. Maybe that's a big part of it, because we lost interest in mobile Linux because it was so far behind, and it was just really for enthusiasts and tinkerers.
I think you're on the money there. I think that mobiles are the only platform that matters.
I don't know about the only platform that matters, but to the end user, they are. People still use proper computers to create those apps in the first place.
I was thinking more from the point of view of a news producer. They're only going to write articles that get clicks, and the only stuff that gets clicks is the stuff people care about, and the only stuff people care about is apps.
Yeah. But I still take this as a positive thing. Why is there so little desktop Linux news? Because it's mature and just works. And it's small paper-cut improvements that are not really newsworthy, despite what Phelim tries to do every other week. Right, well, we'd better get out of here then. We'll be back next week when it will probably be news, but we'll have to see. But until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Phelim.
I've been Graham.
And I've been Will.
See you later.